Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again for another episode of College Football Pros. My name is Nick, and I'm joined, as always, by Drew Van Jura, and we are excited today because we have a very special guest on the show to talk about what he's going through and what he's headed to do in the future. You'll know him from the 2010 Rutgers team. Eric LeGrand, thank you very much for joining the podcast today.
Hey, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, Eric, once again, thank you for joining us. Let's just dive right into it. What was there a specific player when you were younger that inspired you to get into football, or how exactly did that go about?
It actually had two players. Terrell Davis was my first guy I ever really got into, and that's why I'm a diehard Denver Broncos fan. And I wore number 30 my whole life until college. And when I started playing linebacker when I was younger, it was Ray Lewis, and I wore number 52 in college because of him when I thought I was going to be playing linebacker. But those are definitely my two biggest, inspirations of playing football when I was growing up.
Very good. Now we'll go into what kind of brought you to the forefront of the national scene here that certainly transcends football. After you take the hit in the game in 2010, obviously a very devastating moment, but you made a decision that I think it would be difficult and almost impossible for the average person to make, where you kind of looked at your situation and decided that you weren't going to let that limit what Eric LeGrand was, but you were going to use that as a pedestal to kind of get yourself out there, and also to rise above it and ultimately defeat this thing. So my question to you is, what really caused you to take a positive approach to this incident as opposed to looking at it as a negative?
It was everybody around me, that were keeping me motivated, between my family, my friends, even the doctors coming in the room. Everybody just had such a positive attitude, and I'm sitting there like, you know what? I'd actually either, fall all the way and not listen, or, just try to work my butt off, and that's what I made the conscientious decision right there. So no matter what my, situation is or prognosis, whatever they gave me, I'm going to just do whatever the therapists say. I just kind of work like I usually know how to work. I was always a worker. That's it never came, nothing was ever given to me, so I always worked very hard for everything. So I just put that effort that I would use during football into now my rehab.
Right. I mean, and this story is a fantastic one, and I know a lot of people, you're the inspiration for a lot of people. And, everybody talks about the physical side of it, and obviously we know what that entails. But, what is, the biggest adjustment, emotionally or mentally that you've had to overcome?
It's actually physically not being able to take care of myself. I was always the kid who was always on the run, always on the move. I'll go from one friend's house to another friend's and come home, eat real quick, and do it all over again. So now it's, harder than having to rely on somebody, to take me here or take me there, having to ask somebody to do it, and that's probably the hardest part, not being able to do what I want to do when I want to do it.
I've watched the ESPN documentary on Eric LeGrand probably 10 or 12 times now, and the most recent was this morning, and I can't help but to tear up. It's amazing how you've undertaken what has happened to you and really drive to make other people have an ability to deal with the problems that they're going through. But the one thing that kind of touched me the most was seeing you being able to be back on the field the very next year with your teammates and walking them out on the field, and then ultimately winning Sports Illustrated's best moment of the year for that in 2011. Like, how does that feel to see yourself kind of immortalized in a position like that, where you're on the cover of SI, where, there are Hall of Famers that never made it to the cover of Sports Illustrated?
I know it was nuts, especially when that whole fan voting was going on. But just to go back to that moment, though, that was one of the only moments I've ever almost got choked up on with this whole injury. Seeing my teammates out there, and seeing one of my roommates from freshman year, Brandon Jones, getting choked up, and then at the time I started middle linebacker, Steve Harness, him getting choked up. It was like, wow, this was a very emotional moment. It almost got to me. And except for all the fans, that had to be the moment of the year. 2011 was just truly incredible and remarkable.
Yeah, and you talk about all your family and friends that have helped you and kept you motivated. How is Coach Schiano and Rutgers as a university, how have they played a role into your recovery?
They've been great. With Coach Schiano, he made sure from the very beginning that I had the best of everything, best doctor, surgeon, I was at the best rehab center, having a TV in my room, stuff like that. He made sure I always was taken care of, and he always stuck to his word of that. He treats all his players as his kids, and he did that with me. It was amazing. And with Rutgers, there's this whole community, the support behind that. I truly needed that, and when I was trying to go back to get my degree, working with teachers, on late night hours, sometimes Skyping or sometimes talking to them on the phone or meeting in person. And when they weren't, when there wasn't, maybe been an inconvenience for them. So, this whole university has been tremendous for it. I'm glad to now call myself an alumni from it.
Yeah, that's really awesome that you still managed to pull through all this, work with the Reeve Foundation, write a book, and now you've undertaken an announcing career on Rutgers Radio, so I'm sure there's some fulfillment there. How do you feel when you have the opportunity to call those games from your university?
It's cool, again, to do these games. I believe this will be the fourth season that I'm doing now, coming up with them, and it's fun, I get to break down a game of football, and, it's the stuff that I know with the Rutgers, I've been also part of the program, so that comes easy, but I've been expanding my horizons with it, working with Sirius XM, and then the ESPN College podcast, and the Big Ten Network, and I really have fun breaking down a game of football and being around it. It's, it just keeps you, of course, involved in the game by, because it's always evolving, and the players are always coming here and there, but just being around it, being able to, break down football 101 for people to see and hear and give your opinion, it's great.
Yeah, that really is it's got to be so emotional to be back up there in that box calling the games. We're talking about today, talking about your recovery. What is the prognosis, currently for your long-term recovery? Will you ever, have any sensations or feelings or, in the walking? How is that coming along?
It's coming along great. It's just a slow but steady process. Every injury is different. So, that's why doctors use so many percentages when they say, oh, this one won't happen or this one happened. And I regained so much back, It's just, I got to keep on fighting and working with my foundation team, LeGrand of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, to find a cure for paralysis. There's so many people out there in similar situations that don't have the same platform that I have. So I really took on, my role as a leader to not only help me, but help other people. And I believe in my lifetime, we will find a cure for paralysis, and I will be able to walk again.
I mean, you mentioned that you've kind of been able to take this leadership position, which is awesome. Now, I saw in the documentary and have read that you've been able to speak and mentor and talk with a variety of groups of people, teams. If an 11-year-old approaches you and says they want to play football or is it safe, what do you tell them?
I tell them I would 100% go out there and play football if you're going to give it your 100% effort. You got to respect the game of football, otherwise you will get hurt. I believe my accident happened for a reason. It's like 1 in a million, percentages that happened in the way it did. But, for a little kid, I would say 100% because it taught me life, the game of life. You think about it, in football, you work so year-round and work your butt off doing so many different things. For 10, 12, 15, and in the NFL 16 opportunities to actually go out there and play. But meanwhile, all those other days, you're grinding your butt off, working as a team, going through self-evaluations in life, making decisions, becoming a leader, stuff like that. You need that in life. So I always tell people, especially kids, if you're going to go out there, you better give it your 100%. And I would totally agree with playing the game of football.
Yeah, and I think we all agree that, you're giving this your 110%. And the story as a whole is to me, very emotional. Let's talk for 1 second. We know you still follow Rutgers football. what do you think about this team coming up this year? How do you feel about this team this year?
It's going to be interesting. We got a new quarterback, after having one quarterback for 4 years and they get a new guy in there. Should be very interesting. Our defense is, pretty much what our team always relies on. We always a defensive first team. And then you look at the offense, he's trying, to get to some points. But it's very funny, talking with some of the coaches. The running back room is actually the most skilled, the most talented, room on the team. And usually that's on the defensive side, like the D-line or the linebackers or the most talented. This year it's the running back. So I'm hoping they can make some noise and, work as a tandem with the offensive line and everything. But I want to see Rutgers could put up some points this year and see how they can how the defense will play. If Rutgers can put up, 30 points a game, it'll be crazy.
Well, Eric, we certainly thank you for your time to come on the podcast today and just talk about, what you've been through and what's going on with you today. You are definitely one of the greatest inspirations, I've ever met. And I just really, from the bottom of my heart, man, keep up the good work. You've made your family, your university, everyone around you has to be prouder than you could probably ever imagine. And I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you for having me.
All right, you take care.
You too.
All right, we're moving right along today. We are very excited to have the author of Unintended Impact, the story of CTE. His name is Jim Proebstle. Did I get that right, or did I butcher it?
No, Drew, you did terrific. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I've thus far read about a third of this book, and it's been a real fun read as we've talked about sending emails back and forth that we are both in the Northeast Ohio region, so getting to read the first 75, 80 pages about Northeast Ohio football during that time has just been an enlightenment to us to see all that went on around here, the history of the schools and the football programs has just been a really exciting confirmation for us to know how important it was in the structure of the college football scene at the time.
Yeah, and growing up in that time frame, it was just, if you liked football, who couldn't like football? But it was just a great place to grow up. I think we had terrific coaches. And I think that was one of the huge differences for Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, you look at the history of the coaches coming from this valley, even from back then. But it's unmatched, anywhere in the nation. And it's so exciting for myself and Nick to be here, our whole lives and see the evolution of what high school football has become. It's been so much fun to watch, very honestly.
Yeah, great. Right. Well, I'm looking forward to talking about unintended impact and the implication for players today. It's very different today, of course, than it was then. And I should say right up front, some people have asked when they see the title of the book and so forth, and they see the popularity of the topic of concussions and contact sports. And there's kind of an implication that I am not in favor of some of these sports anymore, which couldn't be furthest from the truth. I love contact sports, and I just think that we need to balance out the sport more with player safety. That's all. And I think the sports are such an incredible ingredient for who we are, or who we become, growing up and into adulthood, that it serves us well as young men at 17 or 18, 19, 20.
It's certainly interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the hot button questions we put to Eric LeGrand previous to this was, would he look a 10-year-old child in the face and tell him it's okay for them to play football? And this is a person who definitely has every reason in the world to tell everyone to stay as far away from football as possible, but doesn't do that because of the respect he has from the game. And, we've come a long way from where we were at this point in time when the book was written. And the most interesting thing, I think, from this book is that it isn't written from a scholarly perspective of some people that took a lot of concussions and what it did to them in their later life. This was written from the perspective of someone who grew up with a person who suffered many truck-like hits, as it was often described in the book, and the medical community at that time just didn't have the respect for the concussion that we've come to see today. So why don't you talk a little bit about the book and your brother, and how that really, how seeing that really gave you a passion to write the book and to kind of stand at the forefront of the CTE movement as it is right now.
Yeah. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. I think the basic thing that hit me more than anything was that CTE dementia is the same thing as pugilistic dementia. Pugilistic dementia, of course, was recognized in boxers and diagnosed in 1938. It is exactly the same outcome, has possibly the same outcome as CTE dementia. How the medical community could not connect the dots between getting hit in the head with a boxing glove and getting hit in the head, with another player or whatever it is just amazing to me. And we're really talking approximately 75 years of what I would call the dark ages of how we managed concussions and how we recognize the potential outcome that concussions in contact sports can bring to the players. And this became very apparent to me when my brother died from. Ultimately we donated his brain to Boston University. That's where basically the largest brain bank, I think, is in the United States right now. And CTE dementia isn't diagnosable until after somebody dies. So when we got the diagnosis that his cause of death was stage 4 CTE dementia, which didn't surprise us at that time, then we started going backwards and kind of peeling back through history, so to speak, as when did we first recognize the symptoms, how many concussions did he get, when did they start, and that's what really motivated me to, I'm an author anyway, but that's what motivated me to really build a story so that we could understand from a first-person perspective what a person experiences from the beginning and the possibility for how that plays out throughout life. And it can be a very difficult story. Now, you have to say right off the bat is that everybody that gets a concussion doesn't get CTE dementia. And CTE dementia is still, I think, would be considered relatively rare or unusual. Nonetheless, it's a devastating diagnosis when it comes. And that was my purpose in writing the book, so that we could start seeing what a person has to live with and what the family and the community has to deal with when someone has CTE.
That's really interesting, and from a first-hand perspective as well, a little family background from my end. My maternal grandfather, suffered a gunshot wound to the head in a drive-by on the west side of Youngstown in the early to mid-'70s, so it was still 10 to 15 years before I was born. But as I was growing up, you could tell that this person was just a shell of a person. And I'm not sure if I don't know. I think about as the years have gone by and various family members have explained to me, what happened, and I'm reading the first section of your book where you're talking about the brain doesn't have anything holding it in place, so when it takes the hard hit, it rattles like you would if you're in a car, seatbelt or not, and you get in an accident. Your body is in some kind of motion. And
it's the same thing as if you were to take an egg and shake it real hard. The yolk inside the egg would break, but the eggshell would be fine.
Right.
Very similar analogy, as the yolk is similar to the brain and it floats in fluid.
So I guess my point was, I felt like for the most part I went through the entire time I knew my maternal grandfather, I was never able to develop a relationship with him because he wasn't cognizant enough to understand the relationships. He had a very tenuous grasp in itself on the fact that he was a husband and a father, let alone a grandfather. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily a heartbreaking thing to watch, but I'm sure from your position it had to be much different, where this was somebody that you grew up with, not only grew up with, but idolized because of the dedication they had on and off the field to their profession, to their family, and then to watch it kind of deteriorate because of what we didn't know at that time about concussions.
Yeah, Dick and I played, as you know, in Northeast Ohio, the grade school Catholic League is one of the best young leagues around. Now, maybe we shouldn't have been doing that much contact at that point in time, but Dick and I played together in grade school, then at Central Catholic in high school, and then we both played together at Michigan State. And each of us sustained concussions, and that was part of the frustrating part that a lot of people have is, why not me? Why didn't I get a concussion? Or why didn't I get the CTE dementia? And because of the concussions I had. And a lot of players are wrestling with that, or kind of waiting for another shoe to drop for these symptoms to begin. But it was devastating in our case because there was literally no name for what was happening. And Dick was, and you read in the book, Dick was a very successful businessman early on, and was quite well set up financially and in his position in the community. And then to see right around age 38, to see these strange behaviors start to begin. At first, maybe we thought they were arrogance, or at first we thought that he was just too full of himself because of the money he made. But what was happening as you look back is his value system was starting to change. And the way he thought about life was starting to change. And then how he reacted in terms of the decisions that he made in his business and his personal life all started to change. And at first we all judged him badly. We said, man, Dick's kind of becoming a jerk. Yeah, his kids were having a hard time with him. The marital situation was tough, but it's just slow. And what made most sense to me of all the things that I've studied now on CTE dementia, what made most sense to me is that when it starts, the brain actually starts to shrink, but it's very slow. When Dick died, his brain was 70% of the normal volume that a brain should be for a man of his size and age. So over 30 years, he was losing about 1% of his brain size each year. So you can imagine that when your brain shrinks, it's not going to work very well. And it's going to cause a lot of behavioral, social, paranoia, decision-making, executive functioning, disinhibitive behaviors. It's going to cause a whole host of behaviors to start to present themselves to the world around them. And when the disease has no name, the world around them doesn't know how to react.
Right, and I think that the biggest, thing that people should take away from everything with concussions is when, in your research that you've been doing with concussions and CTE, children, people let their kids play at an early age. Do you think that should change? And do you think those kids should have baseline tests, which they didn't have back when your brother played and when you played? But do you think do you think those tests should be administered at a young age?
Well, the baseline test we had would be the assistant coach, after you kind of shook the cobwebs out of your head, the assistant coach would come over to you and say, "Are you ready to go back in?" That was the baseline test. So to answer your question directly, I think there's some things that have to change at the early age. I think football is a phenomenal sport, but I don't think that we are changing the game of football by having kids play at 8 or 9 and even earlier than that. One of the things that science has found is that the most important developmental period in a young person's brain is from 10 to 12. Any major disruption, clearly a concussion would be one of those, any major disruption to that person's brain during that growth period can have long-term devastating effects. Doesn't always have it, but it can. So the brain of a young person, 10 to 12, is very, very vulnerable at that stage. And so I look at it and I say, okay, would I allow my son, if he were at that age right now, to play football? I have a grandson who's 13, and I asked him, his name's Jack. I said, Jack, can you tell me one of the symptoms of a concussion? And I was very sad to hear that he could not identify any symptom of a concussion, which tells me, and it kind of relating back to the age level, first of all, kids that age don't always pay attention that well, and they don't always learn very well around topics like this. But it tells me that the program that he's playing for in Colorado is not teaching the kids the things that they need to know in order to protect themselves. And that's step number one, absolutely step number one, because that's how the culture of the game will change. Right now, I was talking to Sally Nogle, who's the head trainer for Michigan State, and she said, you won't believe what's going on at Michigan State. He said, people are self-identifying concussions. People are looking out for the other player. If they don't seem to be behaving exactly right, they'll go to the coach or go to the trainer and say, you probably ought to take them out a short while. I mean, that would have never happened in the 50s or 60s. It was tough it out and, keep on playing is the way we thought. But for young people, I'm not so sure that playing contact football at the age, in fact, I'm quite sure that playing football at the age of 8, 9, 10, I don't think that has a bit of difference in terms of how good the player is going to be in high school or college. I just don't think it connects. I played with too many good players, really, really good players, who never started playing until a freshman in high school.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, piggybacking off that, so you're talking about, the kids coming home from school and maybe not knowing what a concussion is. Some of these people that might be listening to this might have children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, whatever it might be, playing contact sports. So if a child comes home, what should, from a parent's aspect, is there any signs or symptoms that they can see that the child might not understand, but the parent could look at it and go, okay, let's maybe get this looked at a little more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there are, for sure. I mean, anybody could the easiest way to do it would just go to Google Mayo Clinic, for example, or you could just Google concussion symptoms, and you'll get a host of about 12 primary symptoms of a concussion that lead to dizziness, obviously a blackout or loss of consciousness, some kind of a ringing or a sense of fuzziness in the brain, a lack of balance, any kind of a nausea type of a feeling after getting hit in the head is a symptom of a concussion. Migraine headaches afterwards is a symptom, or just headaches afterwards is a symptom of a concussion. And there are just lots of them. Loss of consciousness is naturally the largest one, but it's not the only one. And none of them are confusing to know about. It's just simply a matter of being aware about it. I mean, if I'm talking to people that I know that are in the profession as coaches or whatever, one of the things I'm promoting, I said, okay, when I grew up, I had a 3-ring binder with probably 50 or so different plays in the binder that I had to know, okay? And did you guys have those playbooks when you played in high school and so forth?
Yeah, it was a small binder with about 50 pages, but yeah.
Yeah, and we all have that. We all have some kind of a binder with our plays. I think every playbook ought to have a section in the front as to what is a concussion and what are the symptoms of a concussion and what's my responsibility as a player if I think I have one. I mean, I think that is the simplest thing in the world to do to protect our young athletes. I mean, I'm not so far gone that I'm trying to keep people from getting hurt. I think contact sports prepare us in no other way for a lot of the different hurts we get in life. I mean, we get hurt financially. We get hurt relationship-wise. we get hurt spiritually. We get hurt in a lot of different ways. And learning how to handle those adversarial situations, I think a lot of it comes from our experience in contact sports.
Yeah, I think personally contact sports are a great thing, not just from that perspective, but just for building a variety of attributes that will be needed at the next level in life. My genuine concern for people of this generation is so many of them are becoming secluded in such a point where they're forsaking contact sports to sit and play video games, and even though they may put on a headset and talk to somebody on the other side of the country, there's still no replacement for having that bonding experience you have with your teammates and the joy that you get from winning something in an active perspective. And I think just from my experience, the 12 to 14 years I've been in the workplace, I tend to find people who were involved at some point in athletic activities in school to be a little better at working with teams, whereas people who weren't, they seem to kind of be a little more on the loner end, want to do their work by themselves. So I think there's a lot of merit to the team building you get. And like you said, I mean, that all helps you to learn how to deal with the scrapes and bruises that you're going to get in life, because especially the older you get, the deeper and tougher those scrapes and bruises become.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you in terms of the character development and the developmental elements that we're experiencing for the first time many times, particularly in high school, but maybe grade school, but high school for sure, high school sports. So but I don't think it's an either-or world either. I mean, I think that certainly there are individual sports like golf and tennis and things like that where you're not so much on a team, but you're still learning different kinds of skills. Or there are other kinds of skills that we learn when we're interacting with somebody across the world on a computer. I mean, the world today certainly is a hell of a lot different than it was when we grew up in the 50s and 60s. But the point is that we all have to learn and be taught how to take prudent risks. I mean, taking risks is part of what's an element of success in life, and I think football or any of the contact sports helps us learn that. And if the risk doesn't work out, it allows us to learn how to get off our butt and get back in the game and keep moving forward.
I agree with you, and one of the adages I live by going off of that is that scared money don't make money, whether that be in business, any real situation where you might have to be a little more risky than you want to be. If you're not willing to take that risk, you'll never achieve the rewards that come with it. But I want to take a little bit of a step up in level in terms of, we've talked high school and college. Right now we're in the Hall of Fame weekend, and possibly one of the more unfortunate endings of the CTE disease is Junior Seau, who was just inducted into the Hall of Fame. And you look at this player, and for Drew and I, this was a guy who was going young and active in our teen years, so I have a lot of memories of him. I'm sure Drew does as well, and it's awful when you see somebody that you enjoyed watching so much have an end like that. The NFL is currently doing a little bit more with their concussion protocol to ensure that, hopefully that some of these effects are mitigated, but really is what they're doing with the concussion protocol just a short-term solution to what is a long-term problem? And what do all levels of sports really need to begin to do to really take care of this CTE potential problem?
Yeah, boy, that's a big question. In my personal opinion, and from those I've been around, I think the NFL is doing more of a cosmetic treatment on concussions. They've not really totally acknowledged the fact that a blow to the head, a concussion, will lead to CTE dementia, or can lead to CTE dementia. So I think there's a bit of stepping up to the bar that the NFL still has to do. Everything from the healthcare side of it to the education side of it and maybe even changes of the game. I was in a discussion with an all-pro linebacker. I'll leave his name out for right now, but an all-pro linebacker for the Chicago Bears that I said, what do you think needs to change? And he said that one of the major things I think that needs to change in the game, and unfortunately it might be hard to take for the fans, is I think we need to eliminate the kickoff. The kickoff is an extremely risk-oriented play. And any of the special teams plays tend to be risk-oriented plays because you have players that are running full speed. And oftentimes the players that are on the kickoff team, just like when you played or when I played, you kind of earned your stripes at the beginning on the kickoff team, and you're kind of like a crazy man going down the field. But it's kind of like if we eliminated the kickoff, would football survive? And we eliminated the flying wedge. The flying wedge was a play that was eliminated that people loved, but there were too many injuries that came from the flying wedge, and football survived nicely. So maybe an analysis of the game needs to take place with some true understanding of where are the concussions coming from, and focus, not at the big ball of string, but try to peel back a little bit and get at the root cause of where some of the significant concussions are coming from.
You mentioned
I don't have all the answers by a long shot, but there's some of them that I think are obvious, particularly in the area of education and medical responsibility to the players, and those kinds of elements. But we still have to find a way to eliminate the concussion in the first place.
You mentioned earlier about the egg yolk, and I just kind of want to circle back on that because I think that's a really good analogy on what a concussion really is. It just rattles around in your brain. I guess this may be a two-part question, but, everybody talks about the different grades of concussions. In my mind, a concussion is a concussion. But, are there different, grades and different types of concussions? And how many concussions are too many? Is one too many?
You're not going to – the game won't exist. The game won't exist if one's too many. And concussions in and of themselves can happen. And if they're treated appropriately, there's no long-term effect. What the major element in concussions are what are called repetitive impact syndrome. And that's where you get a concussion, and then within a relatively short period of time, even up to 2 weeks, you get another concussion within that period of time. So the brain isn't really allowed to heal properly. So then that's why the protocol for sideline management of concussions is so important, and that can't be a coach's decision. It has to be a medical decision. Did this young person get a concussion? And once they get a concussion, there's a whole protocol that takes over in terms of how the person is treated and when the return to play policy is put into play. Now, there's the other thing. It's called subconcussive blows. Those are, I suppose you'd say, lesser concussions. And that's the repetitive head contacts that particularly interior linemen get. I mean, they're not so much the bigger concussions, but it's that repetitive, constant head knocking that happens. And subconcussive blows can lead to the same level of damage as major concussions. Now, if you're going to ask me how do you distinguish between one or the other, I'm not medically competent to answer that, but at least I know those are the two different kinds that people in the profession talk about.
So it wouldn't be a podcast unless Drew and I talked about professional wrestling, but this is there is some relevance with this because next to pro football, I think professional wrestling is actually, maybe the next biggest entity that exists in popularity globally, and I think there's a fair parallel to be drawn between the two in the aspect that, look, we're not discussing, whether wrestling is predetermined or not. The fact of the matter is when you're getting dropped from 10, 12, 15 feet in the air onto your back, there's nothing holding your head into place. And we've seen over, the course of our lives, the amount of professional wrestlers that die under the age of 50, a lot of it has to do with drug abuse, but you don't necessarily know. Are they covering for symptoms like migraines where the drugs alleviate that at least momentarily, and then that takes a toll on their body? And I bring this up because one of the reviews in support of your book was from Chris Nowinski, who I believe was a Harvard grad and ended up starting the Sports Legacy Institute, which really, started to take a look at head injuries in professional sports. Do you think down the line that there can be almost this relationship between these two contact sports that could really help to, conducively and accurately diagnose and help to work towards prevention of these injuries?
No question, and I'm really glad you took this turn in the conversation, because Chris Nowinski, I know Chris pretty well. Sports Legacy Institute is a partner with Boston University, where we mentioned that Dick's brain was donated, and Chris helped us through that donation process. As you mentioned, his background as a Harvard graduate, he played football at Harvard, and he said, yeah, a lot of that is choreographed. But these are big, powerful people, so I think your parallel is accurate. These are big, powerful people, and even though much of the wrestling event is coordinated or choreographed, mistakes happen, and when they happen, they're big mistakes. And I know Chris suffered a number of concussions middle of his career, and he was pretty successful in the middle of his career, and I think I know that's what sent him on this path for concussions and the long-term impact of concussions, leading potentially to CTE dementia. Chris and Dr. Robert Cantu were the co-founders of Sports Legacy Institute, and as you probably know from League of Denial and all those kinds of things, you've got Bob Stern, who did the foreword of Unintended Impact. He's the behavioral neurologist. And then you've got Ann McKee, who's the neuropathologist. They all work on the same team together in trying to move this whole discussion of concussions forward. But I think you're right. I think the parallel in fact, I think Sports Legacy has a promotion this summer with the Worldwide Wrestling Federation as a fundraiser. So I'm quite sure that you will see more of that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that I'm certainly interested in, giving the athletes their just due, because look, the reality of the situation for the majority of people when they hit college football, that's as far as they can go, and that's not a disrespect to them, but there's only so many positions available at the next level, and they're going to suffer the same types of hits. It might not be at the longevity of someone who ends up going into professional sports, but ultimately I think that this conversation needs to be elevated so that these programs have more of an aftercare program for people that end up suffering with this.
Well, on the average, there are about 2,000 NFL players, roughly. In high school, there's about 1.1 million players at any point in time. In college, about 75,000 players. And I don't know what the number of players are in Pop Warner in that area, but the point is that there is an inordinately larger number of players in the amateurs football arena than in the professional arena. Concussion is a concussion, and if research is correct that the 10 to 12-year-old is more vulnerable, and the other research is that about 50% of the players are going to receive a concussion at one time or another, many more than one. So you've got, if you look back now with those numbers, if you look back and say, okay, from the time that I played, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, how many people are still living today, including the people that played last year, maybe graduated from high school and will never play again, but how many people are living today that played football and had a concussion, at least one? And you're into the 40, 50 millions of people that have had. Now, are they all going to get CTE dementia? No way. And I don't want to do a Chicken Little type of thing. It's not the point of this. I don't think it's fair to it. But the point is that I look at that whole period up until about 2005, maybe even 2010, as the dark ages of medical practice in terms of managing concussions. And today we're all knowledgeable. There's no excuse anymore, whether you're a parent, whether you're a coach, whether you're an administrator, whether you're an official in the league or whatever. The Big Ten just announced that they are putting trained spotters. Did you see the Big Ten announcement a couple weeks ago? Where they're putting trained spotters of trainers, professional trainers, on the cameras to watch the game so that they can detect if a concussion took place on a certain play. I mean, that's a big step up in terms of taking responsibility for player safety. Now, the NCAA isn't anywhere near to that level of responsibility, and I think that, who knows what's going to happen there, but I think the NCAA has been remiss for many, many, many years in terms of their proactiveness around player safety. I really do. But we'll see what happens with the lawsuits and those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's really going to be interesting to see, with the concussions becoming the forefront of everything, in contact sports, not only football, but wrestling, soccer, everything. So I just really hope that, with you coming on talking to us, that it's been very educational. I know on my end, Nick, I know you've learned stuff, correct?
Yeah, I try not to do anything. I try not to converse with anybody unless I feel like there's an opportunity for me to learn something, and I do a lot of talking. So I'm just saying that to say I believe there's a lot to be learned in conversing about a multitude of subjects. And what I'd really like to do in the off season when we have more time to plan is I'd like to get you back on and maybe reach out to somebody like Chris and some other people involved in the medical profession and really do a much more elongated, dedicated, maybe even week-long series on the variety of injuries that are occurring and what we could really do to push for more measures to be taken to ensure athletes are being taken care of at all levels.
Well, you guys are distinguishing yourself. I know your program is relatively new, at least by comparison to other standards, but you're doing things a little bit different, and your approach and your programming. You have the opportunity of setting a standard that's not there. Something like the idea that you just offered, I think, would be received very, very, very well across all avenues of not just contact sports, but the military as well too. I mean, people coming home from the military, one of the major diagnoses is a CTE dementia element of our veterans because of their exposure to high-impact weaponry. And the concussion sounds that come from that, the same kind of concussion exists. Right now, there's a big initiative in soccer. The second most vulnerable sport to concussions is women's soccer. And there's a big initiative right now to eliminate the header out of soccer up to the age of 14. And that's really hard to do. I mean, the header is such an integral part of the game. But the women's soccer is the second most vulnerable sport to concussions. So, there's an avenue for discussion around here that would be extremely beneficial to your listening audience, I think. The parents or the players or just people who love the game, it's important to know what we root for. And if we root for that big helmet hit anymore, shame on us. We got to think differently about the sport. That's not really what the sport's about.
Absolutely, and we want to thank you again for coming on. And like I said, we will do our best to organize something in the off season that we could really give more diligence to this issue. Where can people find what you're doing and where to get the book at?
Yeah, thank you. The Unintended Impact is available at any online retailer anywhere, and you can also purchase it through any bookstore anywhere. If they don't have it in stock, they can certainly order it through their customer service counter. And I just hope that people read it and take the responsibility of understanding what CTE is. My biggest frustration in this whole thing of concussions is all we see are the bullet points of how a person's life ends with concussions. And I didn't mean bullet points literally, but we're not really understanding what the person who has concussions has to live with. And we're not learning what the signals are, the recognition of what CTE dementia looks like. So I hope people are interested in the book, Unintended Impact, and if they have any comments about it, they can reach me on the website, jimproebstle.com.
Well, we reached the end of yet another exciting podcast, and if anybody wants to talk about with what they heard in this episode, where can they find you, Drew?
They can always find me on Twitter at CFBProsDrew, and where can they find you, Nick?
They could find me on Twitter at CFBPros, on Facebook at College Football Pros, and online at www.cfbpros.com. We will see you next time.